Hi, Angela Wolf here, owner of Angela Wolf Patterns and Online Academy, and we are still on location with the travel band, so welcome to my studio. Today we're going to talk about welt pockets and bound buttonholes. Both can add a very classy look to your outfit, and they're really simple to sew. So let's take a look. Here I have an old vest I made years ago, and this is a bound buttonhole, and you can see the welt pocket is very similar. This has stitching, I put decorative stitching on here. There's so many things you can do here. So let me show you how easy this is to do. And I hear my iron is ready, so we're ready to add interfacing. So the first thing you need to do is transfer the markings from your pattern to your fabric. And I kind of left a layout here to follow. I always give myself a guide at the end. Now, this is a fabric marking pen, but you could use tailor's chalk, whatever you want to. And I mark on the right side of the fabric because that's the side you're going to be sewing from first. Next thing, you're going to need pieces of fabric. Cut the width that you want your pocket. It could be anything. I cut these 2 inches wide. Then you press it in half and make sure you have interfacing on the inside. And you can see the bound buttonholes are the exact same thing, just a little bit smaller. And if you're going to do a pocket, you need to cut yourself a pocket. Is pretty much, you can make your own if you want, but I cut mine just a little bit wider because I can trim that off. You want it to be wider than your pocket so you have plenty of room to work. And I just use the bottom of my pocket as a fold, so I just have a piece of fabric here. All right, so the first thing I need to do is mark the location of this. And I just put 2 pins in here because we have to add interfacing to the back of this. You need something to stabilize your pocket. So if I put 2 pins here, now I can just mark this and mark this here. Pins are an easy way to get a guide like that. All right, now I'm going to take my interfacing and lay that just along here. And you can see I'm going across the seam here too. So make sure that fabric lays nice and flat. I'll just use my pocket as a buffer with my iron. And to get the fusible interfacing to stick, you hold your iron in place. Sometimes I use a little bit of steam. And just hold it in place for a second, and it should just stay there. All right, let's make sure it sticks. Yep, that's pretty good. All right, now back to this side. So we're gonna go to the sewing machine, but I'm just gonna give you a visual here. I think you'll see it better. You're going to sew these pieces with the raw edges going this way. And we're going to stitch from here to here. And I'm going to go ahead and just pin these in place because I like to give myself another guide as well. Transfer that marking of where the end of the pocket is, just like that. All right? And then I have this piece here with the raw edges towards the inside because you're going to stitch from here to here, and then it will flip. And once this flips, you have to imagine then the finished side will be in the inside of the pocket. So I'm just going to pin this one in place, just to keep this here for now. And let's transfer these markings over. It's just easier if you give yourself a lot of guides to follow. So because this is 1 inch wide, you're going to stitch down 1/2 inch. It needs to be equal on this side to this side when you're stitching. Otherwise, when you go to close your pocket, it won't close up. So let's go to the sewing machine. I just have it set at a straight stitch with 2.5 as a guide. And I'm just going to line my presser foot up into the center of this. You could also give yourself a marking if you needed to make sure it's even. Now, when you start stitching, make sure you do a couple stitches and then do a couple stitches back stitch because you need to secure that end. And let's go ahead and just stitch down to the other end. Again, I'm using those markings here as a guide. Now I want to point one thing out. When I stitch the other side, I need to make sure that these 2 end at the same place and these 2 start at the same place. So sometimes I'll just stick a pin in there because it looks like it's just a little bit off where my markings are. And I stitched a little bit past here. So I just want to make sure that wherever I stop, it's exactly in the same spot. You'll see why once we turn this pocket right side out. All right. Make sure that I'm in the center of that panel. Go over just a little bit more. Again, do a couple stitches and then do a couple back stitches. All right, stitch down to the other end. All right. All right, so here's our pocket. It looks like these are both pretty close, even. All right, let's go back to the table and I'll show you what we do next. So the next thing we're gonna do is I'm going to cut, but I'm gonna draw this first so you can see it. So you're gonna cut a triangle at each end. And when I do the snipping, I'm gonna snip right to the stitch, but not through the stitch. And then you're gonna cut right down the center. My line is crooked, but make sure that when you're cutting, it's straight. All right, so I'm just gonna cut from this side. Make sure you're using nice sharp scissors. So I'm gonna stop about, maybe an inch. It could even be a little less, but about an inch from the end here. And now let's go around to this side. And I'm gonna cut, stopping about right here. All right? And now I'm going to trim. I'll do it from this side. I think you'll see better. Now I'm not cutting my panel, I'm just cutting the fabric of the jacket. Right to that stitch line, but not through. And again, this side as well. Right to that stitch line, but not through. And again on this side. Okay, now take these panels and flip them to the wrong side of the fabric. And when you do this, you'll see that these should butt up. Both of these finished edges should butt up against each other. I'm going to give it a little pressing. Now, you have a few options. Sometimes I will go ahead and just hand tack this together to keep this straight. For now, I'm just going to show you how to sew it. So the next step, if we look at the right side, you could now make sure that these pieces end up just touching each other. See, this will be your pocket. You could go around and do a nice top stitching here if you'd like, but the next step is going to be, we're going to flip this back and you have your triangle right here. This is what you're going to stitch next, and I'm just going to go ahead and pin this so you can see this, and then I'm going to draw where you're going to stitch. So instead of stitching a straight line like this, you're going to stitch a line that goes like this, kind of a little bit of a curve, and you're going to do that on both sides. The reason for that curve is it will actually make it look like a straight edge. It's tricky sewing. All right, and I'm also going to grab my pocket while we go to the sewing machine. Let's go ahead and stitch that first corner. Again, I'm using contrasting thread. It'll make it a lot easier for you to see. Back stitch and around. You can see that stitch here? See that curve? That looks great, okay? And look at, when you close it, it actually looks like a straight pocket. All right, let's go to this side here. And I'm gonna do the same thing. And again, when you open that, this meets and this is nice and straight. So your pocket is just about finished. What about, let's add a pocket lining. So on this side, if this is the upper part of the jacket, you're going to want to stitch. So you have to imagine it's going to look like this. So the first piece, we're going to go wrong sides together to the bottom edge of your pocket. Slide this over. And I'm just going to stitch basically on top of my first stitch line. All the way from one end to the other is fine. I'll flip this around so you can see this. Like that. And now this piece is going to go right up here to here. And we're going to stitch that. Again, just following my other stitch lines. This is the easiest pocket ever. Okay, so this is what it looks from the inside. The next thing I'll do is trim this down a little bit, but you'll stitch along each of these edges to secure your pocket. Let's go back to the table and I'll show you what this looks like. Just give this a little pressing. So from the right side, you can see my chalk marks. From the right side, there's my pocket. And you can see these edges are nice and finished. And from the back side, I'll press down my pocket just a little bit here. So this is where I mentioned I would trim this down just a little bit. You want to make sure each side is even. So you'll stitch all the way down this area here so you can see from the back side. That will enclose our pocket, and then do the same thing on this side. You could also do a French seam. That would really make this look nice. And once this is stitched down from the right side, your pocket is completely finished. So the only difference, by the way, between this and a bound buttonhole is with a bound buttonhole, you're not going to have a pocket on the back. Instead, you'll see here that the facing is attached to it. So what you do instead is just cut a rectangle. Very similar to what we did there. The same width as your bound buttonhole. You're going to cut from here to here and flip that to the inside. And that's what gives you this here. And then you would just hand tack this to the inside of your buttonhole. Then the inside looks as good as the back side. And that's how easy it is to make a welt pocket or a bound buttonhole.